The cat is away, so the mice are going to play. The cat, of course, Brendan Dwerzinski. The mouse, well, that's me, and I brought a friend along with me, and I am excited to have everybody around. Let's have some fun. Let's talk some Cutdown, and it is football season. Boys, hit it. Hi, everybody. Let me take this thing down. Let's see if this curtain can come up for us. That would be a wonderful thing now, wouldn't it? What a start. There we go.
Hey.
Click a couple buttons and we'll find our way, everybody. Welcome to this. This is why Brendan does all that stuff, and I don't. Welcome to the Pick Six, everybody, on Game On Wisconsin. I'm your host tonight. I am Jacob Westendorf. I am not joined by Brendan Dwerzinski. It is a bad night to be a man named Earl in the world of Brendan Dwerzinski, because he is going to see the Dixie Chicks with his wife. Didn't go by himself. I guess I should clarify that. Wasn't his idea even, but apparently it's like his wife's all-time favorite band. And who am I to argue with Mrs. Dwerzinski? I did have to argue with Mrs. Bretl to get Mr. Bretl on the show tonight, and that is Paul Bretl of the Packers Wire, Dairyland Express, and Sports Lead 1050. You hear him there all the time if you guys are into that side of the radio things. And really, I think I covered everything, Paul, but I could be wrong. Welcome to the show.
No, you nailed it. I appreciate you having me, Jacob. I always enjoy our time together, especially when we're talking Packers.
Which is any of our times together.
Most
I'm
of the
almost
time,
certain
right?
of that. Packers, and then like, what Paw Patrol toy did you have to buy this week? Which that's not inaccurate. So for those not familiar, Paul and I have known each other for about 5 or 6 years now, maybe a little bit longer than that. We have 2 kids, and they're basically the same-ish age, both of them. He had his second before I had my second, and we've been able to do that and kind of watch those things here. But what I wanted to start with here, as far as topics, let's dive right in. And we have what we call the extra point here, which we have 6 topics. We'll go through all of them with you. And it's, after you score a touchdown, you kick the extra point. If you're Anders Carlson, sometimes you make it, sometimes you don't. And this time around, we're going to go in here. But Paul is famous, and I don't know if you guys know this or not, but Paul is famous as the greatest kitchen in the Green Bay area. And I have been to Paul's house 3 separate times, I believe, for dinner. And each time it was wonderful. I feel kind of bad because I think the first time it was just me, but I had heard stories about these chicken wings from when Kurt Benkert had made his stop at the Bretl household. But I was basically like, hey, man, what do I got to do? Like, what do I got to do? And then I stopped my way there, and I did that, and we've done this a couple other times since then. Actually, it's kind of become a bit of a summer tradition, I guess, that we kind of come by and hang out. Just do a few things. So the question here is, what is your favorite dish to cook?
That's a great question. So I do enjoy cooking, grilling, using the smoker. Right now it's still the wings, but it's not the smoker version that you had. I've been doing them on the grill. And
both.
So that's been my favorite thing right now, but I'll dabble with pretty much anything. I do enjoy the cooking process of it, like everyone else, not so much the cleanup part, but you name it, I'll give it a go. I'll find something new to whip up on the weekend and see what comes of it.
Yeah, I like things smoked. I like them. When I die, you guys are going to hear kind of how that happens right now. I enjoy things smoked. I enjoy things grilled, and I enjoy them deep fried. Those are like 3 of my favorite things to kind of go through there. So no, and chicken wings are certainly and chicken wings done well. I don't know if there's honestly anything better food-wise than a chicken wing done well. Now, the problem, of course, being is it's hard to do them well. But if you do them well, like that right amount of crisp, that right amount of just smoky style in the meat, it's oh my God, it's phenomenal. My favorite dish, I'm pretty traditional in terms of everything. I like grilling steak. I enjoy the air fryer has become one of my favorite things, which is kind of amateur hour, but that's okay. My wife had started making these things. We cut up potatoes, but we put them in the air fryer. So it's like homemade French fries essentially. And they work very quickly. So that's kind of a nice thing to do. That is mine. So thank you to everybody who's jumping in here in the chat. The question, Brendan did not get replaced already. If anybody is on the chopping block today, it is me. So if you guys want to think about it, Brendan is like Aaron Jones. I am Patrick Taylor, if you guys want to use that kind of analogy for there. And yes, Mark Trova, better known as Brian Cashman, the inventor of the Oreo, which cannot be overstated as how wonderful the Oreo is. But says easy on Western New York because apparently a thing, I didn't know this, Paul, you and I are both Midwestern hillbillies and the elitists out there in New York, but they tell me they invented chicken wings. I didn't know that. Hot take, Jeff. Shout out to you and your family who are wonderful. Nick and Annie and Patrick the Sloth. Let's get rolling here, though, into the show. I'll tell you the meatloaf story off air because that's a little complicated. I guess it's not all that complicated, but the first topic of the day, they did do the 53-man roster today. It's the initial roster. And if the Packers ever did it as just, it's the initial roster, because we already have one move that we're anticipating tomorrow. Matt Orchek was cut today, the long snapper. And then tomorrow he will be re-signed as Luke Tenuta is put on injured reserve. Kind of a sneaky, smart move, I guess you will. Teams do that all the time. They manipulate ways to get through the roster. But if Tenuta is not going to, so if they put him on injured reserve today, Tenuta's out for the season. If they put him on injured reserve tomorrow, he's subject to being able to return. And they must clearly like him. They claimed him last year. They rostered him all season, and they've kept him around. I mean, it would have been easy. He got hurt in the Cincinnati game. Is that right?
Yep.
In the Cincinnati game, and they brought him back after the fact. Or they still brought him back, I should say. It would have been easy to just kind of dump him and say, hey, it's a back end of the roster. O-lines. I had a friend who will remain nameless that said anytime Brian Gutekunst sits down to take a dump, he craps out an offensive tackle, which seems to be pretty accurate. But when it comes to the roster, the first thing that I noticed that jumped out at me, and maybe this is a byproduct of me, but they were heavy on them. Pass rushers, they kept 6 of them. And that to me was, I don't want to say surprising, because, Brenton Cox was like the darling, if you will, of undrafted free agents. And then the other 5 guys, it was just like, who do you cut? If you only want to keep 5, who do you cut to keep Bretton Cox? And it's like, Justin Hollins is a good player. He started with the team at times throughout the course of camp. JJ Anagbare or Anagbare. I've been butchering his name for 2 years now. And one of these days I'll get it and get it consistently. Anagbare led the team in pressures through the preseason. He was phenomenal, or at least he did going into that last game against Seattle. I don't know if Cox ended up passing him or not. But, Lucas Van Ness, first-round pick, he's not going anywhere. Rashawn Gary, best player on the team, arguably, he's not going anywhere. Preston Smith, vested vet, not going anywhere. I mean, they had those 5 guys in front of him, and it was just, they're not cutting any of the first. Maybe if Anagbare just had a really, really bad camp, I think that could be a thing, but he didn't. He was awesome. That game against the Patriots in week 2 of the preseason was I mean, I always said I would have been excited to see just how that game would have progressed if it was a regular season game for him. Because in a quarter's worth of play, he had 2 sacks, a strip sack, and a forced fumble and fumble recovery. Like, that's incredible for how that works. But they kept 6, Paul. Was there any surprise on that with the way Cox's preseason progressed and everything like that?
No, not really. I mean, I've had, I've been picking 6 for pretty much all of summer. That they were going to keep. And I think the one question mark for me, once we really started to see Brenton Cox emerge during that Cincinnati game, because his 2 weeks of training camp prior to that initial preseason game, they were pretty quiet. So when he had that, I think it was a 3 pressure performance against Cincinnati, that was kind of his coming out party for the summer after he had a solid offseason programs. And, it was just a launch and a jumping off point for him. So from that point on, I thought if there was going to be someone potentially in danger, it would have been Justin Hollins, especially as the Packers, we've seen it at several positions go with the youth movement, because he's a veteran on a 1-year deal on an inexpensive contract that's easy to get out of, and at a position that has a lot of depth. Like, that's the recipe for moving on from a veteran player. But again, I never thought that was going to be the case. And the big reason why is for the reasons you mentioned. He's been a really consistent performer against both the run and the pass, and this edge rusher unit as a whole against the run that's an area that they have to improve in. You mentioned as well, he's seen his share of snaps with the starters throughout training camp with Gary being sidelined. And this is a deep edge rusher room, but if we look at what Holland's role can potentially be, I guess we don't know yet if Gary's going to play week 1, but if he does, potentially could be on a snap count. And then in terms of just readiness to go out there compete, I mean, Justin Hollins is right now ahead of Lucas Van Ness. I mean, in terms of that aspect of it. Now, they're, of course, going to find a role for Van Ness, get him out there in pass rush situations, move him around a ton with stunts like they did a lot in the preseason. Just give him opportunities to say, hey, go from point A to point B and get the quarterback. Because right now that's where he's set up to be the most successful. But potentially Hollins could start the season, as the fourth man in that rotation again, and with Gary potentially being on a snap count. So ultimately, I think that's a big reason why they ended up holding on to him. And also, there, as we all know, Jacob, and I know you go by this rule as well, there's no such thing as too many pass rushers. The more the merrier.
No. Yeah, the more the merrier. And then when you look even looking ahead a little bit, you mentioned Hollins is on a 1-year deal. Preston Smith is going to, in my opinion, if he's on the team next year, he will start progressing into that starter in name only kind of thing. And Van Ness might become the starter, or, if Cox has a big season, he could be in line for something like that and do that. But I think what I'm most excited about with this pass rush group is, and this doesn't include, some creative stuff that they may not have to do since they kept 6 guys, but like Colby Wooden and Carl Brooks both have dabbled on the edge in college, and they have the capability of doing some stuff like that if they so choose. But gone are the days of, hey, I can remember as recent as 2 years ago, Rashawn and Preston come off the field. Here comes Ladarius Hamilton and Jonathan Garvin, and you're essentially punting on getting nothing against those guys. They're professional football players, but they weren't very good. And the next play that Jonathan Garvin makes that I see him make will be the first. I think that
I was just going to say the depth this year compared to last is so much different. Like they had to release Keyshawn Banks, another undrafted rookie they brought in. And I think if Banks was here a year ago and had the same performance that he had this summer, I think he might have made the team. He's someone who, again, he had his flashes in the pass as a pass rusher, was stout as a run defender, really setting the edge well. So I think that just goes to show the improvement that they've had depth-wise, and they needed it. I know a lot of us were this time a year ago, we're talking about that being a concern, and ultimately we saw why once Rashawn Gary went down.
Yeah, I think Bill Huber wrote a couple of weeks ago, the Packers had 8 sacks last year on third down, and 6 of them were by Rashawn Gary or something like close to that effect, which is incredible because Gary didn't play from November 9th onward. Like that is it's a long time to not put Gary's a great player. He's one of the best players in the league at his position. Of course, you're going to take a hit when that happens. But the nice part now is, especially as Gary's going to suit up and play week 1. I think we feel pretty good about being able to say that. He's not going to play 85, 90% of the snaps like he normally have. But with Van Ness, Hollins, and Agbury, and if Cox is active, I don't know if they'll keep all 6 guys active. Like, I don't know if all of them will get a helmet. But if they do, you can have that rotation. And like we saw last year with the way, the Eagles did literal line changes. The Giants, when they won their championships back in the early 2000s and late 2000s, early 10s, literal line changes on that defensive line. The Packers could be able to do that, at least in theory, with, a nickel rushing group. One group, it can be Preston and Gary with Clark and Wyatt in the middle. And then the next one is Wooden and Brooks with Van Ness and Agbury, or, however they want to do it. Doesn't really matter how that, figure it out, whatever way they need to do it. But I thought that was interesting. It was, that was like one of the guys to keep an eye on. And it was, if there was a player that Green Bay could cut that could possibly get claimed, I feel like it was Bretton Cox, just because of positional value, upside. This is a guy who's probably been on the NFL radar for years. And, he didn't get drafted because he had some issues when he was in college. And it's hard to get kicked out of the University of Florida and the University of Georgia when you're at least average at playing football. Cox was better than average, and they still kicked him out. One question I did want to get to here in the YouTube chat before we move on to our next topic. But it was a good question, I thought, from Iowa Joe. And the question he had was, why do they keep Royce Newman, the human revolving door, on the roster? My answer to this is look at the depth on the interior. And I know that we could say like, oh, Royce Newman's bad, so there's that really depth or whatever. But, I mean, of all the guys that you think are good on this offensive line, like the backups, I should say, that you think are good, Yosh Nijman, Rasheed Walker, Luke Tenuta, who the Packers kept, Caleb Jones, all those guys are tackles. Like the depth on the interior is kind of shaky. And if nothing else, Royce Newman has played a lot of snaps and he's played a lot of football. And I mean, I don't think he's holding a roster spot. Like there isn't a guy that they cut that I was like, man, they should have kept him instead. And they could have just dumped Royce Newman. Plus the offensive line is a position with 100% injury rate. And this could be something as simple too as when Tenuta's back and ready to be activated, they just kind of flip that. But I'm interested in that. Maybe Mpe did outplay him, but remember I guess they played against the same kind of players and could fill in. But a year on the practice squad, I think will do Mpe some good. And I think he will end up on the practice squad. The Packers clearly like him as well. That's kind of my thinking on Newman. I think he's probably gotten to that stage where he's still not a good player, but he's better than like how we think of him, where it's like as soon as he's in the game, we're going to notice him right away, and he's going to give up 6 pressures and 12 sacks.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. He checks the boxes in terms of what they like at the offensive line. He can play either guard position. Obviously, with their tackle depth, they shouldn't need him there, but he was taking snaps there in training camp practices, has experience there in college. And then
Owen Reese always talks about players that could like get you out of a game by playing out there. Like it's not ideal. You don't want him to play there, but hey, Fubar situation hit. Everyone's hurt, minor injuries, but can't go back in the game. Like Royce can stand out there and has played out there. So it's either him or Sean Ryan, for example. And again, neither situation a great one, but if the Packers are to that point, I would rather have Royce Newman playing tackle, as weird as that sounds. Okay, let's move to our next topic.
And then, like you said, the experience. I mean,
I'm sorry, you froze there. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, and like you said, the experience. He's got over 1,000 snaps played under his rookie season, and then the lack of depth, like you mentioned, it's him and Sean Ryan. Those are the secondary interior options. Yeah,
they are. So we'll move to our next one, and this is the point of. It's always kind of a cute storyline, I guess, whenever the Packers come into camp. But they kept 3 undrafted free agents. I mentioned one, Brenton Cox. The other one, Malik Heath, was kind of obvious. And the one that was a surprise was Emmanuel Wilson. I did not think the Packers were going to keep 3 running backs, especially in with the new practice squad rules, to where I made a point for Packer Central last week where the Packers could essentially have Taylor, Goodson when he's healthy, and Wilson all on their practice squad, use all their elevations. That's 9, and that's basically more than half of the season. If somebody gets hurt, you sign whichever one you want to the active roster and kind of go from there. But Wilson led the NFL in rushing in the preseason, had an 80-yard bomb in the first weekend of the preseason against Cincinnati. That was a nice thing to see, obviously. Great story coming out of camp. And I went back to – I remembered years ago when Joe Callahan made the team out of training camp. And Mike McCarthy said something along the lines of, like, how the hell does he not make the team? And just based on his performance in the preseason, because it was fun. He clearly wasn't good, but, it was fun. Good for him. But Wilson was kind of that way too. Like, he outplayed Patrick Taylor. He outplayed Tyler Goodson, who was injured. Like, if we're going meritocracy and you thought you had to keep 3 running backs, that was the one. I thought if they did that, they would give the edge to Taylor just because of his special teams prowess that he's had in the past. But if Green Bay really wants to, they can just elevate him and deactivate Emmanuel Wilson for a game or something. If they really need that on special teams or something, I guess that's kind of their thinking. And if there's anything we know about the bottom of the roster, it's fluid and it moves a lot. And all it takes is one injury for that. But cool for him. Malik Heath at this point is the team's 4th receiver on the roster, which is incredible considering he came into camp as the guy on the outside looking in. And now one guy gets injured, knock on wood, he's a starter. That's incredible and good for him. He's earned it.
Yeah, as far as Patrick Taylor goes, I was very, very wrong on that one. I mean, I was I was writing in articles. Matt LaFleur has given us the answers to the test in reference to special teams. And I mean, he even said, as far as Wilson's ability on special teams and as a blocker, he goes, he has to get more consistent. On 2 occasions, he said that Wilson had to improve his conditioning. Like, hearing that, to me, I was thinking that this is not someone who's going to be on the roster. Obviously, shown a ton of upside, and that's what the Packers are taking a swing on, and has shown enough, I'm guessing, as a blocker and on special teams to say, all right, we can work with this. And then, as you mentioned and pointed out really well, just the fluidity on the back end of the roster. Like, they'll probably be able to bring back Patrick Taylor. They can elevate him if needed for those special team snaps. But eventually, or at the end of the day, Wilson just made the most of his opportunities. I mean, he had 5 rushes of 10 or more yards, which was the most out of any running back in the preseason, forced 11 missed tackles on, I think, or on the carries that he had, which again was one of the most during the preseason. And at the end of the day, they just went with the upside and the potential that he brings, and saw enough, I'm guessing, of those other aspects and say, hey, we can work with it.
Yeah, and the Packers, I mean, the swing on upside, I guess, kind of goes with what they're talking about. But, you know, I remember during the game Saturday when somebody said something about how they wish they could have seen Emmanuel Wilson with Love in the game. And I'm like, I'm not experimenting with the starting quarterback in the game. So later in the game, he has a pass pro, and Andy Herman has shared it since of his. He was protecting Alex Magoo, and there will be moments, but he's done a good job. And I mean, the easiest way, and like you said, Matt LaFleur, we thought Gutekunst even the same, were giving us answers to the test. The way you find your way on the field, it's kind of how. And I'm going to be interested to see how exactly they use him, if at all. Obviously, there's a long way to go between now and then. So,
I was just going to say, I wonder what the potential uncertainty around running back next year played into that decision. Obviously, A.J. Dillon's a free agent. We have this conversation every year now, but Aaron Jones could be in his final season with the Packers. And we've seen around the NFL, it's a position that you can replace last minute if needed. But I do wonder if that, potential that he brings as a ball carrier, because again, we all saw it. He really flashed in that capacity, played a factor in this as well.
So they're not trading for Jonathan Taylor.
I don't think so. No.
Jonathan Taylor, probably one of the guys on the other side of this during camp. But Paul, you were there pretty much every day. From your side, who's somebody that you think just of this training camp was the biggest winner? And that could be somebody that you didn't think was going to make the roster, but did. It could be somebody that was on the roster, but elevated themselves. Who's the biggest winner in training camp for the Packers?
Well, that's a great question. I'm going to cheat, and I'm probably going to pick a couple of them, honestly. Number one, I'm going to go with Malik Heath. As you mentioned, not just making the team as an undrafted rookie, but going into week 1, he's wide receiver 4 right now. It appears on the depth chart, and not knowing Romeo Dobbs' status could be wide receiver 3 at that point. And it's not as if he's someone who had, 2 or 3 really good weeks. He's been doing this since he got here, since rookie mini camp, since OTAs. There's been a play or two every practice where he's making a grab, and it's his ability to make contested catches. Doesn't have that that Christian Watson, Jaden Reed sub 4.4 speed, but he knows how to create separation and again make those catches in traffic, and the ball just finds him. So obviously a big winner, again, not just being a UDFA and making the roster, but again, someone who looks like is going to play a role in some capacity, at least early on in this season. On the defensive side, I'll pick out TJ Slayton. He has really made a nice jump from year 2 to year 3. He's been giving Josh Myers a lot of trouble in practice, just generating consistent push in the middle. And we saw it in the preseason as well, but it's his calling card is going to be against the run, as that guy in the middle, allowing Kenny Clark to go more snaps at defensive end. But he's really made a lot of noise as a pass rusher as well. I know Pro Football's numbers, he generated 3 pressures on just 13 attempts. And again, that was something we saw throughout training camp practices as well. He is the second interior defensive lineman in that rotation right now. Like when they go into nickel, it is him and Kenny Clark on that defensive front. So I've just been really, really impressed with him because that big jump that appears he's made early on is so much needed for this unit. They have to get better against the run. It does so much for this defense. It puts the offense in more predictable passing situations. And now this defense can play to its strengths. Get after the quarterback. Let your playmakers in the secondary make plays like we know that they can. So I would pick out TJ Slayton on the defensive side of the ball. Just really, really impressed with him. And I'll lump in as well the rest of the interior defensive line. That group just looks so much faster to me this season. From Wyatt seeing more snaps, the additions of Wooden and Brooks. I'm really, really excited to see if they can carry this momentum into the preseason or into the regular season. Because again, any success this unit's going to have starts with being better against the run. It's an absolute must.
Yeah, we talk about it all the time. Earn the right to rush the passer, and the Packers haven't done enough of that over the years. The biggest winner of camp for me is Jordan Love, and I know that's like kind of a cop-out, easy, cliche answer or whatever, but to me, I think he's established himself as one of the leaders of the team, one of the faces of the franchise, maybe the face of the franchise when it's all said and done with this season. And I wrote about this a while ago. I don't think it was a throwaway moment that Love slides, gets hit by Patriots defensive linemen, and there's Zach Tom and John Runyon, and they're ready to roll. And again, was it a dirty hit? No. Was it a penalty by the letter of today's law? Sure. I guess I'm kind of, I don't know. I think they give quarterbacks too much, but whatever. By letter of the law, it's penalty. Was it dirty? No. But do I like to see the players take offense to it of like, hey, don't touch my quarterback? Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's something that if the Packers and Jordan Love fail this season, it's not going to be because of underlying nonsense. Players don't believe in him. Players weren't behind him. He wasn't confident, just whatever those things would be. It'll be because they're young and or not good enough. Which is kind of comforting because when you win, everything kind of doesn't matter anymore. But when you lose, you kind of want to know how to fix those problems. Well, how do you fix the problem of players aren't sold on the quarterback? Because getting rid of the quarterback's tough business, and that's a massive shift, and that's something the Packers are already going through. Do you want to go through that back-to-back seasons? Probably not. Mm-hmm. So I think that was a big win for him. I think that was a big win for kind of the Packers in general. If you want me to pick a not Jordan Love one, then I will go with Luke Musgrave because I think he's set to be – he looks to me like the only tight end on this roster ready to play professional football this season. That's not a slight to Tucker Kraft. That's just how it is. Like, that's normally how it goes. But Musgrave, to me, I think he has a shot to break the franchise record for receptions by a tight end in 2023, like as a rookie, just because they want to get him involved with the ball. They target him a bunch. He has some issues with drops. There will be frustration. He's going to get chances to clean that up. But that is my big winner for that because, again, he's just going to have so many opportunities. And the Packers, they have 3 tight ends on their roster, and one of them is Josiah DeGuara. So, not really a tight end. Maybe they'll change that.
One thing I'll add about Love that I was really impressed with, and with young quarterbacks, we often see the amount of turnovers that they have. And again, not to say that that's not going to happen in the regular season. They're going to get a lot more or a lot different, more complex looks than what they did here in the preseason. But I was really impressed with his ability to take care of the football. He just knew when to try to fit it into a tight window, when to try to push it downfield, and when to continue to go through his progressions. Again, referencing Pro Football Focus, they didn't have or deem any of his passes in the preseason were turnover worthy. And what was one of the more promising aspects of that, going back to the joint practice with New England, in the joint practices versus the preseason, the opponent's willing to give a little bit more of a realistic look than the vanilla ones that they're putting on the All-22 during the preseason game. And the Patriots did that. Jordan Love talked about it after the first practice. They're mixing and matching of personnel, sending more blitzes, disguising coverages. And those are all things that I expect a lot of defenses to throw at Love because it's, especially for a young quarterback, it's supposed to cause chaos, cause confusion, and lead to turnovers. But when the Patriots were doing that on that first day, he did really, really well. Again, not only protecting the ball, but just taking what was available to him and knowing when he should try to, again, fit it into the tight window, when to push it downfield, and when just to take what was there. So I think that overall aspect for me was one of the more promising aspects of, again, what I think was a very, very good training camp for him.
Now we'll go to the other side of things here. Not quite the TV show, but who was the biggest loser?
Biggest loser. Oof. Why don't you start? I got to think for a second.
I'm going to go with Samori Toure. And because he came into camp as somebody that we were told had a really good offseason and was in competition to be the team's third receiver. And that was a runaway. Jaden Reed pretty much overtook him from like the second day of camp. Even when the Packers' first depth chart listed him as the starter at slot receiver, we were all just kind of like, yeah, okay. Like that doesn't match up with what's going on the field. I thought there was a good chance that Toure was not on the roster by the end of today. He was, but I think he's one of those guys that, if Grant DeBose is healthy and practices well and everything like that, I could very easily see them flipping DeBose to be in that spot and Toure to be released or something like that. To me, right now, like Dontavion Wicks probably is the receiver that is inactive at the moment just because he's been hurt. But by the middle to the end of the season, that could be, again, easily flipped to where Toure is the guy who is a game day scratch because they want to get Wicks on the field and get him opportunities on special teams or as a package and a blocker, whatever it is that they want to do with that. But not only that, he didn't just lose on the receiver 3 job. It looks like Malik Heath overtook him as the receiver 4. And like, I only say looks like because I haven't seen it in a regular season game, but that was a pretty big deal that Romeo Doubs didn't play on Saturday. And the first receiver out there with Watson and Reed was Malik Heath. Like, if Doubs, God forbid, can't play next week against Chicago, I think Heath is going to be the one who gets first crack. And that's incredible to think because, again, not a guy that was drafted, not a guy that was on a lot of people's radars. This wasn't a guy that everyone was like, hey, he's going to be one of those undrafted free agents that pushes for a roster spot. After OTAs and camp or, off-season programs, when they were talking about, yeah, this guy's made a play a day, he's just done something every single day for this team, then he started to get on some radars. But I think that led to the demise, if you will, of Samori Toure. Nothing against Toure. I think he's fine, but that's all he is. He's fine. And there's a million other players in this league just like him. But he had a chance to kind of cement himself as maybe a part of the short and intermediate future, and he did not do that.
Yeah, so after thinking it through, one player who came to mind for me was Yosh Nijman, someone who was competing for that starting right tackle spot, someone who very much could have held it down given his past experience, as a starter on this Green Bay Packers team on the left side and then on the right side at the end of last season. But he didn't really push Tom for that. And again, that's a credit as well to Zach Tom and just his ability to play that position. But it looked like Nijman also got passed by Rasheed Walker. Rasheed Walker, as we all know, started the last 2 weeks of camps, taking those starting left tackle snaps when Bakhtiari wasn't in. And previously, those had been going to Yosh Nijman. So that's why I'm picking him instead of someone who really was able to push Zach Tom for that starting right tackle spot. And who knows if Nijman takes that step forward and really is able to challenge Tom, are the Packers more comfortable or more willing to give Tom more snaps at center? There's that potential trickle-down effect with it as well, because is Tom now able to push Josh Myers? But instead of that happening, it looked like anyways, again, how the training camp and preseason games and practices unfolded, that he went backwards and now could be the 7th guy, if I'm counting right, on the offensive line depth chart rather than one of the starters.
Yeah, and that's a payday that he misses out on too, because now it's, he's not even like the starting swing tackle at the, I guess I wouldn't be a starter, but not the 6th man. So he's not the first guy off the bench either. So he was either supposed to be one of those things and he didn't. And I'm interested to see how that all goes. I'm interested to see I'm interested in what Zach Tom's long-term position is, because they have said before, Gutekunst word for word, that he thinks, thought Tom's best position when they drafted him was at center. And they've done some experimenting with Rasheed Walker. I wondered if those two things were related. We have seen probably about 2 snaps total of that offensive line in training camp, but I do think it's something that becomes possible. That being said, that quote unquote center competition always felt like something that it was a competition, but it was a rigged one. Like they wanted Josh Myers to win that job and take hold of it. So they were going to give him every opportunity to do so. And there's still, like, Josh Myers is still a talented prospect. I think we've gotten to the point where a lot of people were sick of him, and he hasn't played a whole lot of football. He played 6 games as a rookie. This year is his first full season as maybe not a rookie. Last year was his first full season, so maybe that's the thing. maybe it's not. Some other nominations, the safety squad, I certainly agree with that. Just there wasn't a guy. Who was it? I think Gutekunst last week said basically that nobody has stepped forward yet. It's like, well, that's not good. Like, they started with Rudy Ford, and then Rudy Ford eventually was a third stringer, and now he's back to starting, and it feels like he's going to be the guy who gets first crack next week against Chicago. That feels to me like a position that is going to get a dramatic makeover at the end of the year. Like whether that's what they did with Amos and then Savage, and they just do that again with free agent and high draft pick or something like that. I don't know, but looking short and long term, that to me is the position with the most amount of question, other than, maybe quarterback, just because we don't know yet.
Yeah, Anthony Johnson's the only guy, 7th round pick, under contract beyond this season. I mean, it's going to have to be a total makeover at that position group. And like you said, the fact that they were 3 or 4 weeks into training camp and the GM's given that response that nobody's really been able to grab a hold of it yet, that's obviously a concerning part of it.
And they released a guy today that I thought was one of the better players. So apparently they don't agree with me, and that's okay. But I'm curious how that all is going to shake. Because Anthony Johnson, you just mentioned, like Anthony Johnson was safety 7 until Ennis Gaines got hurt, which helped him. And then he just started playing well too. Obviously he helped himself. Right now, I mean, if it were me, and I am not Joe Barry, and everybody who's watching the show should be thankful I am not the defensive coordinator, but Johnson would probably be my first guy off the bench. If they're going to okay, Rudy Ford, I've had enough of that. We're going to do something else. Jonathan Owens to me, liability and coverage, special teams-ish player. Not only a lot, I remember the first week of the season, his first impression to me from what I remember seeing live was he gave up a big play against Cincinnati, and their 4th string tight end juked, and he looked like he was stuck in quicksand. Not promising when next week it's, DJ Moore and Darnell Mooney and guys that can actually move a little bit. So the safety group certainly leaves a lot to be desired at the moment.
The one thing I'll say about Ford is I think what they could at least get with him is at least a little bit of stability in terms of, Matt LaFleur complimented him on his communication abilities pre-snap in terms of getting everyone lined up. And last season when Savage was benched and Ford came in, he at least, I know it sounds simple, but he at least did what was asked of him, and he was where he was supposed to be. And, that's probably more than half the battle, honestly. And I think that did lead to some turnover opportunities because he had a fumble recovery just by being in the right spot and helped to limit some of those coverage breakdowns. So I think that's what they're hoping, obviously, that they're going to get with him it's something that he's shown he can at least provide in that regard.
Here's hoping, because they need somebody to emerge. Otherwise, we're looking at, I don't ever like going into the draft where I feel like, and this was like a criticism I had of Ted Thompson, God rest his soul, was like, we have to pick this position because if they don't, then what, kind of thing. I don't want to feel like, and Gutekunst has done a pretty good job of throwing a lot of numbers at positions of need. Even this offseason, I know it was underwhelming because it was Tarvarius Moore and Jonathan Owens and re-signing Rudy Ford, but they still threw a lot of bodies at one of their weakness spots, if you will. So, but I don't want to feel like they're pigeonholed in the draft as saying, okay, they have to pick an offensive tackle because Nyman and Bakhtiari and all these guys are gone, and Walker's here, but he only played 6 games last year, and Tom is going to be the center or whatever. So they have to pick an offensive tackle, and then they also have to pick a safety because all of those guys stunk, and Anthony Johnson was a 7th round pick, and he's the only one who's back. So I would hate to see something like that. Let's get your general observations, and then we're going to do some gambling here a little bit. But you were there every day for the most part. Just where were your expectations for this team prior to camp versus what you think about this team now? Are you more optimistic? Are you more like, I know even less than I thought I did? Just kind of where are you at after seeing everything with your own eyes?
I'm more optimistic. And again, a lot of that goes back to the quarterback and what we saw from Jordan Love. I've already gone into a lot of the big reasons why. His ability to handle those different looks that the Patriots threw at him, his ability to protect the football, go through his progressions, know when to take the deep ball versus, again, what's available to him. And also, I think we really saw against Seattle in this last game, just his pocket presence, his ability to avoid getting hits, his ability to extend plays. And we also saw that when there is some pressure, the pocket's collapsing a little bit. It's not Jordan Love's first instinct to just take off. He's looking to buy time. And it does feel like then taking off as a ball carrier is more of a last resort for him, which of course is what you want to see. You always want to see those eyes downfield looking for the opportunity as you're on the move. So just Love's overall performance. You saw someone that you say, all right, this team he can go in and win games with this team. So of course that was the most encouraging part. A couple other observations. Just the speed and versatility at the skill position. I know part of it was a product of practice, and we got to make sure each of these guys get the number of reps they need. But the ability to mix and match the running backs, the receivers, and the tight ends within this offense is just really, really fun to watch. And we hear Matt LaFleur talk about the illusion of complexity. And that's what this offense can do by running a variety of plays from just a very few personnel packages. And again, that's going to help create mismatches. We saw that, Jaden Reed on a linebacker, moving Christian Watson around gets him matched up within his gains during one of the practices on one of the big clips that was all over Twitter. And so I'm just really excited to see that ability and that they have at their disposal and that Matt LaFleur does, because it can really just open up the playbook for him and take some of that playmaking burden off of Jordan Love's shoulders, because the scheme is doing a little bit of that heavy lifting in terms of creating the opportunities for the offense. One other observation, the blitzing from the linebacker position. It seemed very evident early on. We saw it continue on into the preseason games, and I even asked Quay Walker in the locker room because I had to know if it was just...
What a flex. Yeah, I got to ask Quay Walker. Oh, look at this guy.
Well, just saying, it's not completely out of nowhere, these thoughts. But I had to ask Quay Walker about it to see if this was, just something that were they doing it just to, test Jordan Love in the young offense. And he said that it's something that they've definitely been doing more of this season. And I'm hopefully optimistic that it'll continue. Because again, it's not like it was 2 or 3 days of practice where, all right, this is what we're doing. It was continuous throughout the whole process, which hopefully means it's going to be a part of the playbook that the defense is going to have this season. Because, of course, what we all want to see is this defense doing more of the dictating. Again, we talked about just the talent and the playmaking ability that are at so many of these positions. Utilize it. It always felt like last season it was the offense doing the dictating. The defense is reacting and playing on its heels. Send some of that pressure, take back some of that control is what I think we all really want to see this season. And that's one step in that right direction.
Yeah, it could be. I know the point that you made about the scheme doing the heavy lifting or some of the heavy lifting for the offense. One thing I was encouraged by was Love's ability, from what I saw in games and at the practices that I was at, was the ability to create plays out of structure. Because I know that's like a hot button issue in Green Bay of like, just run the play and throw to who you're supposed to kind of thing. But like what separates the good from the great is that ability to create out of structure. Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, Justin Herbert. What do those guys all have in common? It's that ability. And to create those plays with their arms. Like Justin Fields can create plays out of structure with his legs. I haven't seen him do that enough with his arm yet. Jordan Love has been able to do that. There's a few that he's missed. He's going to miss a couple. The touchdown that he missed to Christian Watson on Saturday against Seattle, like literally broke my soul just because it was going to happen right in front of me, which I thought would have been a cool thing for my nephew and my daughter to be able to see, but can't get everything you want, I guess, on that standpoint. But I'm more encouraged by Jordan Love after watching everything. I'm more encouraged by the offense as a whole. And I say that knowing there's still going to be that game or those games where you're like, ugh, like 202 yards passing, 1 touchdown and 3 picks. Like, woof. That's going to happen. It just is. That's the nature of, like, everybody now is saying, oh, they're going to go through growing pains. But I promise you, those people saying they were going to go through growing pains are going to be the ones saying the whole team sucks when it happens in an actual game that matters. Because it's easy to say now there will be growing pains. because they don't have any consequence to it yet. Nobody's lost yet. We haven't lost any games yet. Green Bay hasn't lost any games yet. On the defensive side of the ball, I think that speed factor you're talking about is certainly there. And just the juice from Colby Wooden and Carl Brooks. And again, I want to see them do it against better players, but they've had their moments against other teams. Like Carl Brooks, that sack he had that was wiped away against New England, that was against the starter for the Patriots. And the Patriots, they're pretty solid. Like, they're not the Brady Belichick Patriots, but they're still pretty damn good for the most part. So I'm excited to see that. One more before we get out of here. Our phrasing is significant to some around here because Brendan is a gambling degenerate and a sick lunatic, and that's okay. But the over-under at Bovada, and I believe FanDuel has this as well, is 7.5 wins for the Green Bay Packers. I just did the season preview show for the Quick Slants podcast with Jason Perrone. For my answer, I will tell you exactly how many wins on that show. So that will come out Labor Day Monday. Be sure to check that out. It's something we've done every year for the last 8 years. But I am saying the Green Bay Packers are over 7.5 wins. In this preseason, in terms of optimism, I'd been pretty set on like 6-11 as their record. It was the same one they had when Aaron Rodgers was the starter, adjusted for era because they're 17 games now instead of 16. But 6-11 was my one. I have them winning 2 more games than that now. I think they'll win a couple games that maybe they shouldn't, and I think they'll lose a few more games that by the end of the year, you're going to be like, man, how did we lose that particular game? But 7.5 is your over under, Paul. Where is your optimism level? And then, based on your answer, does that get them in the playoffs or not?
I'm going with the over. I mean, for the reasons we mentioned about Jordan Love, I'm drinking the Kool-Aid right now with this front seven and what we saw from them in the training camp practices in the preseason. And like I said, if that group can improve specifically against the run, I think we're really going to see that unit as a whole take off, and then the speed, versatility at the playmaking position. Just there's I'm stealing your phrase. There's going to be growing pains, but there's so much potential, and it's really, really exciting. So I'm definitely taking the over of that 7.5 after this summer that we saw.
So are they making the playoffs in your estimation?
Ooh, sure.
I mean, at over 7.5, that could mean 8, which is like 8 and 9. That probably doesn't get you in. But
no. I'd say, sure, let's go for it. Let's go 10 wins.
10 wins, and they make that would probably win the division, I would imagine. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how you feel about the rest of it.
Yeah, I think 9-10 wins in the NFC, just let alone the North, but in the NFC as a whole, whether it's the division or a wild card spot, I think that definitely gives them an opportunity at least. Yeah,
and there's going to be a cluster. So, like, if you're rooting for, well, and of course we're all rooting for the Packers to make the playoffs, but like if you want to keep an eye on like those wild card games, it's like Atlanta, New Orleans, not so much Tampa Bay. The division obviously will matter quite a bit there, but some of those fringe NFC teams, those are the ones that
they play both those teams right away.
And that could be a make or break of like, hey, we lost week 2 against Atlanta and we both finished 9-8, and that's why Atlanta made the playoffs instead of Green Bay, which could happen. It'll be interesting. He's Paul Bretl. I'm Jacob Westendorf. Check us out. You can find Paul, like I mentioned, at the Packers Wire, Dairyland Express, and all over the radio, especially Sports Lead 1055 with John Papadopoulos. And I might have butchered that, but I don't think I did. That's an easy and a fun one to say if that's the case. You can find me. I'm at Jacob Westendorf on Twitter. We're out of time. We'll be back next week to preview the Chicago Bears and the Green Bay Packers, the season opener, September 10th at Soldier Field. 3:25 Central. Justin Fields against Jordan Love. I almost said Aaron Rodgers. I am still in that habit. Almost did it, but I didn't. I want to appreciate you guys that stopped in throughout the chat. I appreciate you guys coming through. I'm looking forward to the start of the season. Football, it's a lot more fun talking live football. You know, as much as I like the camp stories and as much as I like who's going to make the team and who's not, it's a lot more fun when I know who's on the team and when the games have consequence, because winning and losing, that's what makes it fun. That's why it's competition. We're out of time. We'll see you guys next week.